You know what's really gotta suck? When you've been playing a game for 13 hours straight, and you're exhausted, but you have no choice but to keep going because you're at the final boss, and he just doesn't seem to die. And it goes on and on and on, and you finally think you got him, but no, he kills you and he's got only 1 HP left! Yep, this is about the most saddening freak accident you could ever think of, and it's exactly what happened at the tail end of the Mega Man Marathon. Poor Ferenc. I think, well, he probably didn't have the energy left to be angry, but he still must have felt some rage inside. And they were all ready to wrap up the marathon too. We had a final countdown, we even had a Rickroll, and then he goes and dies with the final boss down to 1 HP. And then he had to try again and again and again, and eventually he got it, but I was asleep by that point, unfortunately, so I missed it. I'm talking about Battle Network 3, by the way, for those who haven't seen it. But then again, this is Mega Man we're talking about. Dying was a recurring theme all weekend. They died twice in the first minute because of those horrible Gutsman lifts that nobody likes. And if you like those Gutsman lifts, you have issues. I suggest you go see a therapist immediately. So as a result, they got stuck on a lot of games, and they couldn't even touch Network Transmission or the Mega Man Zero series, and they even cheated to get Command Mission and Mega Man and Bass in by putting them on a different stream alongside the other games, something that they usually don't do except for the obvious Pokémon marathons. And as for the donations, they reached the goal of 7,000, but only thanks to a last-minute donation of, I don't have the exact number, but it's something around 1,700. I am not kidding. Someone actually donated almost $2 grand all on his own. And the question that I'm always asking myself whenever someone donates an amount in the 3 digits, let alone 4, is what kind of income did they make? 1,700? I don't think I made that in an entire month! I couldn't donate what I earn in a month to charity, no way! And as I said, the goal was 7,000 and we got there just barely, and personally I'm a bit disappointed. I thought we would be able to get around 15,000 after what happened during the Final Fantasy Marathon. Then again, maybe it's because of what happened during the Final Fantasy Marathon that we weren't able to get that much. Probably because, well, the Final Fantasy Marathon sort of drained our wallets when it came to donations after, you know, that frantic attempt to get to the magic amount of $50,000. Well, there was just nothing left to give to charity after that, you know. But back to Pokémon, in the chat room, well, if you haven't been there yet, everything seems to come back to Pokémon at some point in time. Don't ask me how, it just does. And there was a discussion that was had in the chat room that really, well, it ticked me off a bit, to be honest. It's the issue of, you know, the more recent legendary Pokémon being labeled as pointless. Now, there are a lot of them. The last generation introduced 13 legendaries. That's a bit too much, I say. 9, maybe 10 should be the max. 13, that's just too much. But to say that they're pointless, I'm sorry, but I just don't agree with that. In fact, most of the ones that I consider pointless are the early ones, you know, the ones that were just, hi, I'm legendary, now catch me. Stuff like the legendary birds, the legendary dogs, for example. The more recent ones, for the most part, are more interesting to me since they've got sort of a theme. In fact, in the 4th generation, there's only one legend that I would consider pointless, and that, well, pointless from my own definition, that is, and that is Heatran. And I think Heatran was sort of a nice throwback to the old days, back when legendaries really were, just as I said, hi, I'm legendary, now catch me. Except Heatran, compared to Moltres and Entei, has the advantage of actually fighting like you'd expect of a legendary. So, the newer legendaries being pointless, that's not a statement I really agree with. Now, I know why a lot of people are saying that. It's because Pokemon, for some reason, is a franchise that is heavily driven by nostalgia. So much that they, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say they cloud people's judgment, but take this LP, for example. I'm playing Crystal right now, and I am having a very hard time understanding why people consider this a better game than the newer ones, especially from Emerald on. After all, what has this game got that the newer ones don't? The nostalgia factor? But that's it! I don't get it! But back to the legendary issue, I will readily admit that the last generation introduced just a little too many of them. And, for example, they could have kept... You see, Cresselia and Darkrai are sort of opposing forces, so they could have made fine mascots for the next generations. After all, not every mascot has to be one of the, the hulking brutes that were featured prominently in the last two generations. But then again, well, Darkrai right now is one of the most dominant Ubers in the game, so I shudder to think of what would happen if it had a base stat total higher by 80 points. That would indeed be frightening. But balance issues aside, since that's not the point, well, I think those two, among others, could have been kept for a later generation, and it would have done just as much, if not even more good. Then again, Cresselia and Darkrai are already heavily involved in the storyline of Mystery Dungeon 2 late in the game, but that's just not the same, even though Mystery Dungeon 2 is what I would gladly call a masterpiece. Which leads me to my next subject. As you know, I wasn't very fond of the idea of a spin-off of a spin-off, namely Mystery Dungeon WiiWare. So how does it stack up to Mystery Dungeon 2? Well, there are 15 dungeons per version, and the dungeons are really similar between the versions, from what I've heard. They're not called exactly the same, but even the names are similar, so the dungeons themselves are bound to be similar as well. But what pisses me off the most is how they handle version exclusives. From what I've heard, I'm not sure of what I'm saying there, but that's what I've heard from some people. Every single Pokémon is a version exclusive. Now, that is pretty bad. I understand that, well, yeah, you're buying a game for 1,500 Wii points, which is like $15, but still, that means that if you want to have all the content, you gotta buy the other two very similar versions. In fact, I dare say that they're almost the same, except now you can catch all the Pokémon using the save file merging thing. That's Mystery Dungeon WiiWare's big thing, apparently. But still, you just bought the same game 3 times just so that you could catch them all. And by the way, nearly all legendaries are version exclusives except for Mewtwo, Mew, Darkrai, and Arceus. And then, even though I don't play games for the story, you still have to keep in mind that there is no story at all in Mystery Dungeon WiiWare compared to the very good story by Pokémon standards in Mystery Dungeon 2. So basically, you just bought the same game 3 times for what is probably more money than Explorers of the Sky will cost you when it comes out. So my advice is, don't hold out for Mystery Dungeon WiiWare when it comes out in the US. Buy Explorers of the Sky if you don't already have Time and Darkness, and never look back. So this random battle is going to be the last one for this video, since I'm not sure I've beaten the guy that we just saw at the bottom of the screen, though I probably did, and it's against a Mantine, which is a very welcome change compared to all the Tentacles and Tentacruels. Which is why I don't totally hate Wingull and Pelipper, even though they completely suck. At least they bring some variety to the table.